Okay, I've been tasked with introducing our keynote. I'm so glad to have Dr. Sufna John here. And so on a personal note for her as well, I was glad in her bio she put the word passionate, because even before I read her bio, when I was thinking about what do I know of Sufna, what comes to mind, the word passionate came to mind. So she is definitely passionate about what she does. So we have some passionate folks here today, so please engage, listen, open your hearts and mind, and be ready to learn and receive. She's thoughtful about how she approaches it. So just, I think another word she had in here was excellence. That was actually another word that I thought of, was doing what she does with excellence, and she absolutely does that. And I'm going to add another one, something, is because she always challenges me to think creatively, think differently. How can we get the job done? We need to get the job done, so we need to think outside of the box. We need to think creatively and differently about how to do it. So I'm so glad she's here to talk with us today. Just like Erica said, sharing her insights, her expertise, and her wisdom. So, Dr. Sufna John.
It's nice to see all of you, and thank you for those kind words, Kyla. So today we're focusing a lot on how can we empower adults in our community to recognize what's happening with their children and to be able to figure out how to best advocate for them. And I'm hoping what this presentation will do is help you get a little bit of an insight about how trauma affects not only children but adults who were once children as well, and how we can think about advocating and empowering them to be the advocates they already want to be for their children and the students that they teach. So some of this was already in my bio, but I want to start with just my positionality, because who I am impacts the way I see this work, it impacts the way I feel passionate about this work. And I'm really passionate about embracing cultural humility as a way that we improve trauma-informed care so that everyone can optimally benefit from the types of services that we are creating. So when we talk about trauma, I want to be thoughtful about what is it that we're talking about, because there's lots of different events that can be thought of as potentially traumatic. And so I'd love to hear from you all, what have you come across in your role, in your life? What are different types of trauma that you've seen happen to our community? Yeah.
I think maybe foster care is kind of one of the things that some of the kids experience. Where do they fit in?
Yeah.
How to project themselves when they really get out there outside the household.
Thank you so much. So she's saying entry into foster care. And what we know is that foster care not only challenges children and family because of the separation that they experience from their caregivers. Many times they're also separated from siblings, they're separated from their home community, from their faith community. And thank you. I appreciate your thoughtfulness and how that might impact children as they grow and develop. Any other thoughts that come to us mind when we think about trauma?
I work with the school district, and what we're noticing is a lot of the families who are barely making it by now are having to go with even less, so the kids are actually being moved around a lot, like hotels and different families, not just foster care, but they've been moved around a lot because of lack of income. And the families just trying to stay together, but they're having problems staying together.
Absolutely, and what I'm so appreciative of what you're saying is, one of the flaws of our system in general is we think about trauma as an individual or a family level problem. And what that does is ignore the societal level factors that contribute to those problems, right? And lack of upwards mobility, poverty, lack of employment opportunities, all those types of things factor into what makes someone more susceptible to experiencing trauma. And there's some up here, you touched on several of them. There's things like grief and loss, and there are things like natural disasters, abuse, parental substance use, or parental mental illness. And so there's a lot of different types of traumas that can happen to people. But the thing that sometimes we forget is that not just knowing someone's trauma history actually doesn't tell us really anything about what has become the impact of that trauma. So when we think about trauma, we think about 3 keys. The events that someone experiences, the actual things that happen, their experience of those events. What was it like going through that? You can imagine entering into foster care when you're 2 feels different than entering into foster care when you're 12. than staying in foster care when you're 17 and aging out of foster care. Those are different experiences of a similar event. And then we want to think about what are the effects? What actually changed in someone as a result of the things that they have experienced? So that's really something I hope we can focus on today, is realizing that trauma history is just one of the things we need to know in order to be able to meet the needs of children. Because more than 2/3 of children nationally will experience a traumatic event by the age of 16. And so a lot of times we talk about trauma as this terrible thing that happens to some people. And I think what we need to start going is it's a set of terrible things that happens to most people, and that happens even more to some communities. So let's look at Arkansas data versus the nation. This is adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. You might have heard this term before. These are potentially stressful events that happen during childhood. And what we see is the red bar is Arkansas, and what you'll notice is we exceed the national average or meet it in every single category of cases here in Arkansas. In particular, we have a very high percentage of children and families in below income level housing. We have alcohol and substance use happening, mental illness, domestic violence, neighborhood violence. And why these things are important is because the things that you experience impact your health. It might not surprise you to hear that someone who's been through trauma has a greater likelihood of being depressed, of having suicide attempts, of having PTSD. The medical community sometimes forgets in this story is they also have high rates of lung disease, heart disease, cancer, metabolic conditions like diabetes. And then when you think about the COVID-19 pandemic, who was at greater risk for poor outcomes after getting COVID? People with lung disease, heart disease, metabolic conditions like diabetes. And so what you see here is risk stacks upon risk. And when we look at the adult population here in Arkansas, you'll notice that I'm going to switch back and forth between children and adults here, because I want you to get a comprehensive idea of what family support could look like. And that means we support children and support the adults who are supporting those children. If you look here on this map, these are the rates of people who experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. This is in the general community. These aren't people coming to mental health. This is like people just walking around. These are people in your church, in your neighborhood, in the Walmart grocery store next to you. Right here in Pulaski County, 1 in 6 adults. If you were in Sebastian County, it'd be 1 in 3 adults have experienced 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. These are estimates from 2016, when we were worse at recognizing this. So these are likely underestimates for what's happening now. So one of the stories to tell in trauma is that we might be in a similar storm, but we are not in the same boat. You might be tempted, people are often tempted, to assume that like all of us went through COVID-19, right? Everybody went through that same storm. But the boat that you are in makes a difference in how you navigate that storm. So someone who didn't lose anyone in COVID-19 versus someone who lost someone close to them in COVID-19, that's not the same boat. That might be the same storm. 2 kids going into child welfare, they might be in the same storm, they are not in the same boat. And an important thing to think about is what builds the boats that families are in to help them navigate the storms of this world. And I want to tell you one of those things is the way that we look. And like this second point in the comment from earlier, if we just look at the trunk and roots, the above ground of this tree, we might be tempted to say that's an individual's problem. That's a family's problem, right? There was abuse just in his family, that's on them, without realizing the roots that make those branches more likely to grow. And as you think about the families you serve, if you think about your own family, or families you care about, how many of them have these roots that contributed to the tree everyone is seeing on the surface, right? And so one of the ways to think about advocacy is to help people appreciate these roots in conversations when they are missing them. Questions like, tell me a little bit more about the opportunities this family has. Because we can hear a lot about you getting mad that Mom isn't doing what's on her case plan in child welfare, are we talking about the fact that mom can't get a driver's license? That contributes a lot for you being able to get employment in the state, right? And so it's not just post-traumatic stress disorder, it's not just depression, it is the worst outcomes of depression. So hopefully by now, I've shared with you this idea that trauma isn't a them, it's an us and a we, and that trauma is far more common than perhaps the narrative in our population likes to admit and think about, and that there are lots of underground, unspoken about risk factors that contribute to a family's likelihood that they will experience trauma and how they're able to navigate trauma once they have experienced it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is zoom in to the actual impacts that can happen to someone once they've experienced trauma. What you'll notice here is that there's a whole lot of them, right? That this is being experienced across a lot of domains. I'm a clinical psychologist, and so one of the things that is a part of my job is diagnosing mental health conditions. And what I know often is when a kid comes to me and they have a depressive disorder, an anxiety disorder, and a behavioral disorder, I'm like, oh, so they have a trauma disorder. That's what this is, right? Because what we know is trauma impacts children and adults across a wide variety of domains. This, you should think of this not as a laser fire, but as a bomb that explodes in someone's life and impacts them across a multitude of domains. Okay? Because of that, though, many children and adults are misdiagnosed with all sorts of conditions, and their trauma is missed in that picture. And the problem with that is not only the stigma of those diagnoses potentially, but also the fact that diagnoses tell us what treatment you should get. And so if we don't know your diagnoses correctly, we are more likely to prescribe treatments that are not going to work for you. And what does society tell us about someone who's been doing a lot of treatment and not getting better? Right? You could go to the best ophthalmologist in Arkansas and your leg would still be broken when you leave. Right? Because it's not just about getting to a therapist, it's about getting to services that actually match and link up to the things that you are struggling with. Okay? And so traumatic events at any age can disrupt someone's development. Okay? The tricky part is development stacks on one another. So let's take an example of math, since we're here to talk about school in some ways, right? And being a change agent for a child in school. If you were moved around a whole lot while you were learning addition, you might become a third or fourth grader who still uses your fingers to do addition. Can you imagine then what it would be like to do multiplication? What would that mean for your self-esteem, for your feelings of worth, for your engagement in the classroom, for the way your teacher thinks about your potential, right? That what we know is it's not just about missing a step. That step is necessary for all these other steps in your life, right? I love that you're here from Pathways today to think about this idea of how do we support the development of children right from the get-go. So what we know is that trauma can impact the way you think about the world, okay? And this may not surprise you, right? A lot of this information might not surprise you, but I'm hoping it presented alongside one another helps to paint a more comprehensive and complete picture in your mind. So a lot of times after you experience trauma, the way you come to expect things in the world, the way you think about the world is fundamentally shifted. How do we reconcile the idea of how many bad things happen to good people? This is a shaking of faith for some people. This is a shaking of their worldview and the way they think about what they are capable of and what their life might look like. They might have a lot of worries about the safety of themselves or others. And what you might see in the classroom is difficulties with what we call executive functioning, which is these higher order mental processes like thinking, reasoning, planning, organizing. By the way, that part of your brain that does that doesn't fully develop until your mid-20s. So if you're looking back in your teenage years and early 20s and you're like, ooh, there's stuff I did, where was my planning, organizing, reasoning brain? It's because that hasn't fully developed yet until your mid-20s. But one thing we should be thoughtful of is, as a society, who are we more empathetic towards when they can't plan, reason, and organize very well. That across these domains, how people receive and think about these impacts change. Hyla in my bio talked a little bit about intergenerational trauma, which is the idea that trauma often gets passed from generation to generation in family trees. And something that I like to share with audiences is you can see the impact on the genome of trauma up to 3 generations later. That this is something that is fundamentally configuring our stress response systems, the way we think about the world as a result of the activation of our stress response. This isn't just something that happens once you're born. This is something that happens in utero, and this is something that a lot of times people don't have control over in the way that we like to say they do. Right? It's really convenient to go, you know smoking is an issue for your health, why are you doing it? Without realizing things like addiction and coping with substances are a common thing for folks whose bodies are uncomfortable all the time. So you might see that folks are really differently sensitive to touch, right? That they might be getting sicker more, not only because sometimes we feel our mental health in our bodies, right? And so whenever I have a stomach ache, I always ask myself, like, did I eat something weird? And or am I nervous about something? Because that's where I feel it, right? I hold that anxiety in my gut. And for a lot of people, there are physical impacts of the way we feel mental health symptoms, but also that traumatic stress experiences dampen your immune system. You actually are more likely to get sick when you are under a large degree of stress because it dampens the way your body is able to function. We see changes in the way that someone processes emotions and is able to form relationships with those around them. You know, one of the things I like to tell folks when they're thinking about trauma is living in a body that's been exposed to trauma, for some people, is kind of like being a pot of boiling water that's on simmer. The base rate of just how agitated your body is higher. And so it takes less in your environment to boil that pot over because it's already at simmer. So people in a child's life might go, what is this overreaction? I just told you, you can't have that sticker today. Why are you freaking out? Look at this kid. He's throwing tantrums over seemingly such small things. But have we dug a little deeper and realized this kid's body's been on alert all day, right? Think about days where you feel high levels of agitation and how easy it is for you to get to a point where other people might look at you and go, that's an overreaction, without knowing what's happening in your life, right? So this is another point of advocacy, is sometimes remembering to tell people when they're forgetting this, the idea that trauma does impact the body. It's not enough to just know someone's trauma history if we don't actually advocate for supports based on that history and the impact on your body. We see that trauma impacts the ability to form and use language as well as communicate with others. And we are a very language-based society. And by that I mean, not only do you have to have a fairly good capture of language to be successful educationally, but also that people make a lot of judgments about us based on the way we communicate. Whether that be the way we use formal, professional language, the accents we have or dialects we use, that there are images of us based on the way that we use language. That's true for children and for adults. There are different words we use, there are different tones we use, there are different ways we feel we're able to be authentically ourselves based on who's around us. And when you're a child who's experienced trauma, language can be even harder, not just in the way you express your words, but in the way you understand language as well. And finally, that trauma can really, really impact your learning. So let's say as we're talking today in this beautiful presentation room, you hear that door open behind you and a big bear walks into this room, right? What are y'all gonna do when that happens? Anybody have an idea? Okay, so some people are like, right to the door, right? I'm gonna be leaving, right? This is something we tend to call a flight Response, if you've heard of like fight, flight, freeze, by the way, I'll tell you in a moment, there are way more responses than just fight, flight, or freeze. So one is fleeing, right? What else might folks do when they experience a stressor? Freeze, right? This one's mine, and the reason I say that lovingly is because sometimes freeze is the least helpful. Because you're not doing anything, actually. You're just standing there, right? And the thing to know about this is your body's natural reaction to stress. Believe you me, when stressors occur, I'm not coaching myself to do nothing. That's just the way my body deals with this, right? So we have freeze. The other we have is fight, which often gets misinterpreted, where people think that's aggressive. Fight is not necessarily aggressive. Fight means you go towards the stressor. You approach the stressor, okay? So some people, when that bear comes in, they're going towards it to protect someone or to protect themselves, right? So fight, flight, and freeze are these things that we talk about in the mental health community without realizing, well, like there's like more that people do besides that. And I'm interested to hear what you think about those. So another response is called fawn. And what that means is that I will be people-pleasing and non-confrontational. I will say yes to everything you say because I've learned that disobedience is dangerous. So have we ever come across families who, when we're with them, they seem really on board with the stuff we're talking about? They say, yes, great idea, love that, Dr. John, totally gonna do it. They don't do any of it once they leave. And it might be tempting to go, look how resistant this person is to the treatment we're providing them without realizing, like, why is it that they feel they couldn't tell me no? That they couldn't share with you? That's not actually something that would work in our family, Dr. John, right? So fawn is another. And the last, which has been composed after doing more research on, is something called flock. It's the idea when something stressful happens, I turn towards my own community. What I do when stressful things happen is I insulate into my own community as a way to protect myself. And so as we think about how trauma impacts people, we want to make sure we're doing that in a comprehensive way and not leaving out certain people because they don't fall into the neat guidelines that we previously developed on what happens to people after they experience trauma. So I'm going to pause here for a minute. Not only because the content we're talking about is heavy, but also because it's a lot of information at once. So I'm curious from y'all, what questions do you have? What reactions do you have? Are there pieces of this that your mind is circling and you're thinking about more? Tell me a little bit about where y'all are at. Share with each other what's going on with you right now. Anybody willing to kind of share with the larger group what you and your partner talked about or what is going on for you? Yeah.
One of the things that we've been seeing is it's like every other child has been diagnosed with ADHD. And it's come to my attention, and I think some of these diagnoses are off. I know you said something about misdiagnosis. So what we really want to know, what is the true definition of ADHD? I mean, we know like the medical books and everything like that, but when we actually see these children, they have this diagnosis and they're taking medications and they're not getting any better. So that is one of our main.
Yeah. So here's the thing. So one thing that might be helpful to know is having a mental health diagnosis and having ADHD is not an uncommon thing. So many times, children with any sort of vulnerability like ADHD, autism, a language disorder, those disorders that we think about more in the neurodevelopmental category, which means you're born with this. This is not something that happened because of poor parenting, right? But we love to say that one. This is not that something happened because of the sugar that your family gives you. You were born with this, right? That we know that children with those conditions like ADHD, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, are at a higher risk for experiencing trauma. Okay? And that trauma can have outcomes that look like ADHD, right? So can you see how it can get really disentangled with what's actually going on because some of these symptoms look like a whole bunch of things all at once, okay? ADHD, there's different types of it. So one type of ADHD is that predominantly you have hyperactivity and impulsivity. It feels like your body is like driven by a motor, like always on the go. These are kids with a lot of like restlessness, agitation. If you're a young kid and we're doing circle time, you cannot stay on that circle, right? You might be moving all around the room, that you have a lot of hyperactivity, lots of excess activity. And when I say hyperactivity, please realize that's in excess from what you would expect from that developmental age. All 5-year-olds are hyperactive. Trust me, I'm parenting one right now. All 5-year-olds are hyperactive. You're looking for, are you hyperactive way more than a 5-year-old, right? So, and impulsive means how much does your body do things without you thinking it through first? And, again, you'd be looking for, kids are not known for their impulse control, right? I know many adults who are not known for their impulse control. And you're looking for in excess from what you'd expect developmentally. So that's one type, is hyperactive impulsive. Okay? The other type is called predominantly inattentive. These are the folks who like daydream, can't get distracted very easily. You're in the middle of a conversation and you're like, wait, are you still with me? Like what just happened there? Right? That distraction, that inattention, right? So you can have predominantly that category, or the third is combined type, which means you have both. You have symptoms of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and symptoms of inattention. Okay? What we know is from research is that a hyperactive impulsive type can be pretty accurately diagnosed even in 3-year-olds. That we can tell, and those 3-year-olds who show those patterns have like a much heightened risk to show impairment in the school setting, in homes, in relationships related to ADHD when they're 6, 7, 8 years old. Okay? The problem with ADHD in some ways is that a lot of people diagnose it without a lot of education. So a lot of kids are getting these diagnoses from places like their primary care physician. They're getting this diagnosis informally by the teacher who goes, your kid is ADHD, right? That they're flagged in these different ways. So for me, when I see a kid who has ADHD, the things I'm looking for are those symptoms being much more than development. Are they getting in the way? Are they impairing this child? Because I'll tell you, as annoying as it is to watch a hyperactive child, it's more uncomfortable for them. It's uncomfortable to live in a body where you can't pay attention and you can't think things through and your body's constantly restless. That's not comfortable either, right? So you're looking for impairment. And the last thing you're remembering is that medication is one option within the course of mental health treatment, right? And that we do have many medications that show fantastic impacts on different mental health disorders, okay? ADHD is one that's often prescribed a medication that's very short-acting. What that means is when it's in your body, it's in, when it's out your body, it's out. Many families with kids who have ADHD will say they can ultimately find a medication that makes a big difference in how their child is able to succeed and show their potential, but they have to go through like a lot to get to the one. Our science is not at the point yet where we can go, this kid, that's a kid who needs methylphenidate versus this is a kid who's going to do better with 10x or guanfacine. We don't know too much about that yet. And so that was a very long-winded answer to tell you that these symptoms look a lot like many things, but don't forget it's entirely possible to have ADHD and trauma exposure, and actually you might be more likely to experience trauma because of things like ADHD. And that you're going to want to ask questions about how this disorder got diagnosed. Who diagnosed ADHD? How do we know that's what's going on? Are we working with a psychiatrist who's able to explain to us well the risks, benefits of doing different types of medication? Right? And so for me, you don't have to be a mental health expert to be an advocate for mental health. Just like I'm not a lawyer, and I advocate a lot for families to be empowered with their legal rights. I don't know enough about it, but I know how to connect you to someone who does. Right? And that's often the function of an advocate. It's not an expert in everything, it's a bridge builder. It's a connector to somebody else who you might not naturally have access to in your life. So we've been talking a lot about how trauma can impact people in negative ways. But I want to be really thoughtful when I tell you, one, most people who experience trauma do not develop PTSD. Just having these experiences is not deterministic. It does not mean you are going to have these things. It's a risk factor. It makes it more likely. But just like traumatic experiences can change your brain, healing experiences can change your brain too. And as we think about supporting families, we don't want to forget about the strengths they have. And those strengths could be really obvious on the surface, and a lot of times they're not really obvious on the surface. And we need to dig into more things like ancestral wisdom. Things like your family has suffered generations of trauma. How are y'all still here? What is the grit that you have developed through the course of your life that you then pass down to your children? It's not just about the trauma we pass down, it's also about the resilience that we do. And resilience isn't a thing that someone has or doesn't have. In the conversation about resilience, we love to go, that person's resilient. And I'm like, oh, that is missing it. Resilience isn't a character trait, it is something that is built in the course of relationships and supports with people. That is what builds resilience, not some natural ability you're either born with or you're not. And so when we think about building resilience, that's the way we start to tip scales and realize that we can balance out some of these risk factors. I might not have been there when you experienced trauma, but I can absolutely be someone that fosters the kind of support systems that buffer the negative impact of that trauma. And that is what it means to be trauma-informed. That I recognize the prevalence of trauma and how it might have impacted you, and that I realize that I can do something about it. And in fact, I should say, you should, right? It's not only that I can, it's that I should do something about it. It's shifting a lens from like what's wrong with you to what happened to you, and starting off with understanding a story before you jump into your judgments of what to do about that story. But I will tell you, even now, I sit in rooms with folks who are very clearly able to say, yeah, we totally know this family is living underneath the poverty level, that mom struggles with a substance use disorder, that they've had to move 3 times in the last 2 years because their rent keeps escalating and they can't afford it anymore. But let's talk about how disruptive this kid is and how resistant this mom is. Like, they forget. It's not just about, you can't just acknowledge someone's difficulties and then do nothing with that information, right? That's almost worse for someone to acknowledge our difficulties and then do nothing with that information, right? So we need to be thoughtful. It's not just about recognizing, it's about responding and supporting people with the outcomes of this trauma. And that begs the question, who do you want to be for a child? When you think about this, I will tell you, when I think of who do I want to be for a child, as a parent, it's my children that first come to my mind. For some, it might be a kid you helped in your office, a kid in your community. Who do you want to be for that kid? Because I will tell you, one thing trauma does is make someone an expert observer of their environment. Remember, they had to be. They had to take environmental clues very seriously to know how safe they were in a situation. They had to be able to detect, is that person using substances? Because if they are, I'm in greater danger. Is mom angry today? Because if she is, I'm in greater danger. Right? So you become an expert at observing your environment. And what that means is people in our communities are watching us. They are watching to see the way that we behave. Not only behave towards them, but spoiler alert, behave towards one another. Because if you walk into a room and there's 2 adults who drop their ability to respect each other, I know I'm not safe here either. Right? And so some of it sometimes is us really being thoughtful about how are we projecting to others that we are someone you can turn to when life is hard. Okay? Let me give you a quick example of this. Does anybody here like chocolate? It's something that they like. Okay, using you as an example, if that's okay. So let's say I had a bowl of M&Ms, okay? And I reached out to you and I said, hey, here's these M&Ms. P.S., like only like 1 or 2 of them are poison. The rest, totally normal M&Ms. Like I just can't see it, but like most of these, really it's only 1 or 2 of them that are risky. Take a handful of M&Ms. How likely on a scale of 1 to 5 are you to take those M&Ms? Some people are like off the liker, right? That's my favorite response actually. People are like, it's not even a 1. I'm at a 0. I'm not going to do it, right? What I will tell you is we all look like M&Ms. We look like people who hurt you I look like a doctor who asked your trauma history, promised you I wouldn't tell anyone, and then did it on the stand in court. I look like an individual who said I was on your team, and then you overheard me making a joke about who you are. I am an M&M that looks like other M&Ms. And unless I intentionally show you I am different, why would you trust me at all? You wouldn't even take a handful of M&Ms. Why would people trust us with the most important person in their life, their children? It's not worth the risk unless we show you we are safe. And that's what I want us to keep in mind. It is not up to us to determine if someone is safe with us. That is with them. Fear and safety are something that someone judges for themselves. We don't get to dictate if we are safe. We don't get to do that, right? That's up to them to determine based on the behaviors that they see in us. Because what we know is safety is something that gets compromised when you go through trauma. Okay? Let's take abuse, for example. 90% of child abuse and neglect happens by a primary caregiver. This idea that there are strangers hurting our children is true for some children, predominantly though it's not. It's the people who they live with. It's the same person who makes the best chocolate chip cookies they've ever had. It's also the person that hurts them sometimes. And we have to be thoughtful of that because that changes the way you see how safe the world is, right? If this can happen with people who I love, this could happen anywhere with anyone. And when you don't feel safe, it's hard to pay attention. Because one of the things I noticed, y'all, when I gave you that bear example, and not a single one of you were like, I would continue to listen to your lecture, Dr. John. I would just be in my seat going, I wonder what slide's coming next. I'm here to learn. But don't we expect this of our children all the time? Because that's what trauma is. It's bears walking into their mind all the time. And then we go, how come you're not focused in class? That must be ADHD. Because you can't focus in class. Without us going, what's actually happening in those moments you drift away? Right? It could be something like a teacher goes, hey everybody, listen up. For most kids, that's fine. This may not be a sound that's fine to someone, right? My vocal tone might be a sound for some that are like, oh, that feels soothing, direct. For others it might be, wow, that person talks loud. That doesn't feel very safe to me. We know though that children who do feel safe at school, they do so much better. It's probably not surprise, right? But we know this. We know they do better academically. We know they do better socially. And so when we think about what could be a trigger for trauma, something that reminds you of the trauma you've experienced, are things like this. I'm going to give you a minute to read through this list, but I also know that you might have visual differences that make reading this list difficult. Okay, so I'll point out some to you. Okay? Things like changes in your routine. Because a lot of times trauma is something that happens in unpredictable ways. It's outside of the routine. And so then when the routine changes, I'm like, uh-oh, what's going to happen? Because every time this routine changes, something scary happens, so I don't like changes in the routines anymore. It could be being called out on their behaviors in front of everybody else. Because shame is an emotion that triggers me into my trauma. Here's what's hard about trauma triggers. Many times, they're on the inside. There's stuff you wouldn't be able to tell from what happened on the outside. This, all of you can hear. But for example, someone who's been through chronic poverty, feeling hungry could be a trauma trigger. And I can't look at any of you right now and know if you're hungry or not. So for me, it might look like, look at this problem that came out of nowhere. And for you, it's happening in your body. It's not out of nowhere, it's just I can't see it from the outside, okay? So we know that there are many different triggers for trauma. And if you do school advocacy work, what you might find, if you dig a little deeper, is it's a lot of this stuff that's leading to behavior problems in the classroom. That a lot of teachers will tell you, I can't even deviate from my lesson plan for a minute without this kid freaking out. And we can go, I'm wondering about trauma. Because I think I remember you talking about this kid is in foster care. I'm wondering what changes in the routine feel like to him. Were there moments in his life where someone changed the routine and that ended up being a difficult experience? right? That some of being an advocate is reminding. Squeak that wheel, y'all. Right? Being a squeaky wheel is hard. It's especially hard when your community and culture are known for being squeaky wheels in your attempt to advocate. Okay? And many times children cannot squeak those wheels on their own, and families cannot squeak those wheels on their own because they have trauma triggers too. So I want you to remember, the thing about children is they grow up into adults. And many times we have more compassion and grace for children than we magically do when they're adults. What happens that suddenly makes us go from this is someone I care about and have empathy for to this is someone who should be held accountable for their actions and punished accordingly? How do we make that switch from grace and empathy to punitiveness and judgment? But a lot of parents that I work with will tell me that when they were kids, everybody understood. And the minute they became an adult, that went away. And people did not treat them respectfully anymore. So I want you to also pay attention to things like a parent being called into the school to hear about their child's problems. That can feel really trauma triggering for parents. Lacks of control over the decisions being made about their child in the classroom, when we know lack of control can be a trauma trigger because many instances of trauma were in times where you couldn't control the situation around you. You couldn't even control your body sometimes during trauma. And so as you're thinking about holistically what children and families need, being a safe person comes up over and over again. But I want to help you realize what does being a safe person actually look like, okay? Because not everybody says this, like, be safe. And I'm like, what is safe? Like, what does that look like? So I'm here to give you some roadmaps into what looking safe for someone who's been through trauma looks like. One of them is your own regulation. Okay? When there's a storm, the first thing we need to do is regulate our own bodies. Because the last thing someone needs when they're under stress is us coming in on fire, right? And I'm telling you, there's a reason you're on fire. It's probably actually a good one, because you care a lot about this. So when you see it fires you up. I'm not saying get rid of that fire, I'm saying tempt it to a place where you can use that fire to make others around you feel safer, right? Self-regulation is a big deal, and knowing what regulates you is important. There are a lot of adults who they've never really actually thought about this intentionally. How do you regulate yourself? How do you calm down? What are the things you could do quickly to regulate yourself? Is it mantras? Is it prayer? Is it deep breathing? Is it laughing and telling a joke? One of my favorite ones is I don't know why I'm saying this, especially because this is recorded, so this will be out in perpetuity. This is what I call myself. I'm a big fan of like self-talk in the third person, so I'll be like, Steph, how are you doing? Like, girl, come on. Like, what are you doing? Like, I'm Steph. Steph, is that happening again? I know you care, but is your care coming out in ways that people can hear? Right? That I'm a big fan of self-talk as a way to regulate. So this is my message to you, there is no right way to regulate. You might have to try out a bunch of different options to figure out what's the one that's actually going to help you calm. Okay? Being consistent, predictable, and calm can be ways to make someone else feel safe with you. Okay? And I should add, there should be another bullet on this, by the way, that being authentic and genuine and decoding your behavior is one of the easiest ways for someone to feel safe with you. Okay? And so a lot of people have learned, like, you can't tell the truth, though. Right? And so, like, I'm not going to tell the truth to you. You haven't earned my truth. You haven't earned this story yet. And so something that can be helpful is decoding. Saying something like, you know, a lot of families that I work with talk about how the way they get treated is different. Is different because of where they live, their race, their gender, their age. Have you noticed anything going on that you sometimes go, I wonder if this is because of that? That's a very different way to ask the same question, right? Where someone could go, oh, this feels like I kind of understand why you're asking me this. This one feels less safe because I don't know what your intentions are. So decoding your intentions is a simple skill that can be very effective when trying to demonstrate if you are safe. Because remember, you don't get to decide if you're safe. That's up to other people to decide if you are. Okay? Another is moving from a judgment stance to a curious one. Are we asking more questions than giving statements? Are we really listening to the stories we elicit in somebody else? Because moving from dysregulation to regulation often means first listening, connecting, and validating before problem solving, okay? And several of us feel this in relationships, okay? If I go to my spouse and I'm like, ugh, I had such a hard day. He's like, here's what you gotta do. You gotta go and write this email. If he did that, I'd be like, not happy with that response. I need you to listen first, right? Because if you come in saying you can fix my problems without hearing them, how do you know your fixes are at all relevant? How do you know your fixes aren't something I've already tried and you're talking to me like I don't know what I'm doing? By speaking and advising first instead of listening. So listening, connecting, and validating are keys to someone being able to engage with you in problem solving, teaching, making amends, consequences, right? So in a school setting, before you jump right to a 504 plan or an IEP, it might be helpful to take a moment to listen and connect and validate before you jump into problem solving. Or people don't feel heard. They don't feel respected. And they're less likely to trust your solutions if they don't think you've heard their problems. Even if you end up giving them the same solution you would have, if it's after you've heard them, it feels like it's more relevant and someone's more likely to do it. There are ways you can maintain safety during the regulation process. Think about proxemics, which means how close you are to another person. Some people feel a lot more comfortable with someone back a little further in a neutral body posture. Something like this is a neutral body posture. What do you notice about here? I'm gonna do this actually. What do you notice about the way I'm standing right now? Okay. It looks relaxed, right? My weight is shifted to the back, by the way. It looks relaxed. My arms aren't doing anything. My face isn't really doing anything, right? But a lot of times when we enter meetings, people are like this. Okay. It could even mean that you think you're being engaging by leaning in like this. But I'm telling you, people have been through trauma. Someone leaning up into their space does not feel necessarily the same that it feels to you. You feel like you're engaging, you're leaning in, you're listening. For other people, they might be like, why is this person coming closer to my body right now? That makes me feel threatened. So notice here I'm giving you so many bullet points because how trauma impacts people is different. There is no one solution to this. I wish there was, y'all. I wish there was. But a lot of times what it is trying things and monitoring and asking how those things feel. So things in my office like, hey, some people prefer to stand up as we're talking and getting to know each other. Others prefer to sit down. Others prefer the floor. Like, where's the best place for us to get started together? Right? Giving people choices in the way that you engage with them can be a way, again, to maintain safety. Because, oh, this is a little blurry. I'm going to read it to you. And many times throughout their lives, children will feel the world has turned topsy-turvy. It's not the ever-present smile that will help them feel secure. It's knowing that love can hold many feelings, including sadness, and that they can count on the people they love to be with them until the world turns right side up again. This is not about toxic positivity. This is not about you always looking happy. This is about you being connected and showing someone no matter what you feel, I can hold it with you. Because I'll tell you, one of my favorite things one of my therapist mentors taught me is, how hard is it to hold your arms like this? Go ahead and put your arms in front of you if you're able to. How hard is it for you to hold your arms like this? Depends on how long you have to hold them alone. Right? This for 5 minutes, fine. This for 30 minutes, cool. This for generations that I've had to hold my arms up alone, really hard. Right? And so again, it's not about us going, this is not that big of a deal, why can't you handle it? Right? It's about us realizing many people are so tired. They've had to do this alone for so long. They're so fatigued that we need to be thoughtful that some people do need additional help. For some folks, having a supportive environment that can buffer that stress, whether that be at home, at church, in your football team, that's enough. They don't need mental health therapy. But for some people, they do. And that's maybe one of the biggest advocacy points you can have, is to be someone that goes, hey, have you thought about that? I can't tell you the amount of times where I sit in meetings at schools and no one's even brought up idea therapy. Even though we know this kid is struggling with a whole lot, no one's really brought up that idea. And definitely not evidence-based therapy, okay? I would say it's an area of growth. For the field, a big area of growth is us partnering better with the medical side of things, because I think oftentimes those two sides have been pitted against each other in the narrative. It's either your physical body or your mental health, without realizing that your mental health is derived from your physical body, and your mental health affects your physical body. So like these two things are interwoven, but they're often thought about as very different disciplines. So one of the pushes to help with this is called integrative care, where you start putting more mental health into those clinics. So instead of a family having to go see their PCP, then go to a therapist's office, can we move therapists into primary care physician clinics, so that way families can get all their needs more holistically met in the same place. So I think your point is well taken, and I don't think we are at a great place in coordination of care for many things. There are some that are working beautifully. There's something called the Women's Health Clinic at UAMS, where it's for pregnant and postpartum women to not only get support obstetrically, but also get support for their mental health and addiction, if there is any substance use during pregnancy. So that's a clinic, for example, where physicians are working right alongside mental health professionals to more holistically support someone. But we got a long way to go. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts y'all have?
I'll make a statement. Just some of the districts that I work in that have received the training is the awareness piece. I think is the most important aspect of it, because educators don't really think the way that we think about behavior and how mental health also contributes to how kids learn. But they are, it opens their mind to the fact that this kid did experience something, so I do need to kind of back off, when they're in my class. And I've seen the results from the training, and if you can just get them in there just to do that piece, the awareness, it'll change some staff. May not change all, but it will have an impact.
Yes. And how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? And a lot of this is incremental change. And believe me, I feel torn when I say that, because I'm well aware that many populations have been waiting a long time for us to do this slow incremental change. Right? In many ways, people who are hurting can't wait for us to turtle our way to better solutions. And the counterpoint to that is tackling big problems usually does not mean easy solutions. If there were easy solutions to this, we probably would have solved it by now. These are complicated problems that take incremental growth. Right? So I appreciate that. I would agree with you that awareness is probably the biggest piece that comes out of a training. Is I might have said one thing to you today that the next time you're in front of a kid or family, you're like, oh, that pings a little different. I'm seeing this just a little bit differently as a result of that training. So I'm glad that you've seen that impact. Thank you for sharing that with everybody. You're welcome. Thank you again.
As we're wrapping, just want to present you with a little token of our appreciation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
I love it. I have the esteemed pleasure of being the moderator for today's panel. And our panel is full of equally, if not more, dope people too. And I'm gonna go from left to right here to introduce these individuals. And the first person is Dr. Michael Watson. And Dr. Michael Watson worked with children and families for over 17 years in schools, hospitals, and residential settings. He has his master's degree in both counseling and school psychology, a fellow school psychologist, yes. He obtained a PhD in school psychology from the University of Central Arkansas in 2016. Yes, he has worked in schools for over a decade as a school psychology specialist. And currently, he's the Behavior Leadership Support Coach for the Office of Coordinated Supports and Service. In his role, he is responsible for providing support in developing tiered behavior systems in Level 4 and Level 5 school districts in the state of Arkansas. And I'm so thrilled to have him a part of this. He comes with lots of knowledge from the school psychology side and also from the Department of Ed side. So it's going to be awesome here. The next individual is Miss Angeletta Giles. Did I pronounce that right? Angelita, I'm sorry. Ms. Giles' greatest accomplishment is being a mom to London, who was diagnosed with autism in 2012 at age 4. So she's going to be our parent perspective on the panel. Since the diagnosis, Ms. Giles has founded PAAK, P-A-A-K, did I pronounce that right? Which is the Parent Advocates for Awesome Kids as well as Autism Overcomers, a program where she has mentored and empowered individuals, parents, and families all around the world who are impacted by the autism diagnosis. Ms. Giles in London's journey has been featured in publications including Autism Speaks, Savvy Magazine. Where does that sound familiar? They have them in those stands around. It sure is. Arkansas Children's Hospital. And in March 2020, Ms. Giles released her book, Take Authority Over Autism. We have a lot of authors. That's awesome. Which encourages parents to not be focused on the label of autism, but rather on the awesomeness of their precious child and their identity beyond the diagnosis. Go ahead. All right, sis. Ms. Giles has 2 Masters of Science degrees in Structured Curriculum Leadership and Applied Behavior Analysis. That is awesome. She is also a BCBA, Board Certified Behavior Analyst, and is currently pursuing her doctorate degree in Clinical Behavioral Health with a focus in Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. So I wish the school would say something. In the coming weeks, she will sit for the Certified Brain Injury Specialist exam, where she will use her certification to integrate behavior analysis with traumatic brain injuries, cerebral palsy, spina bifida diagnoses, just to name a few. Ms. Giles has had the honor of serving on various statewide and national advocacy councils, including the Arkansas Department of Special Education, State Advisory Council for Disabilities, and the National Family Advisory Council for the Autism Treatment Network. Ms. Giles represented Arkansas via the National Family Advisory Council for the Autism Treatment Network and gave remarks at the national meeting in 2014. What a great ambassador for us. Ms. Giles lives in Arkansas with her beautiful daughter, an autism overcomer, London, and their fur baby, Callie. So glad to have you. Miss Yolanda McCollum is our next panelist. Ms. McCollum is a licensed professional counselor. Yay, we got a counselor. Okay, licensed educator. Ms. Yolanda holds certifications from the Arkansas Department of Education in Early Childhood Education, pre-K through 4th grade, English as second language, pre-K through 12th grade, and school guidance and counseling, kindergarten through 12th. Is our panel not? I want to sit down and ask. Ms. Yolanda began her career in education as an elementary school teacher and has also served as an elementary and high school guidance counselor for the Little Rock School District. Ms. Yolanda is the owner of Strategic Counseling, LLC, where she provides professional counseling services to individuals, couples, and school counseling and mental health consulting services to local school districts. So glad to have that perspective here. Meet school counselors as part of the conversation, and I'm so glad to have your perspective. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Regina Hunt. Ms. Hunt has her master's and is a licensed psychological examiner in independent practice. So she can work independently. Works for Pulaski County Special School District for how many years?
20.
20. Tons of experience. Grew up in the Arkansas Delta area, has 2 adult children, and a total, this is going to overshadow the 40 years experience in mental health. We're not saying anything about your beautiful age, yeah. 40 years, just the experience, 40 years experience in mental health. Her main focus is the area of child mental health, and so pleased to have her on this panel as well. So let me give you an idea of how I would like this to flow. After I, of course, am done with the introductions of the panel, what I would like to do is feel free for you all to ask questions of the panel about how to maybe spark change. What I would like to do, and I ask for the panel, is to think about aspirational things. So there may be some strategies and tips that they can provide that are tried and true, that may, things that are already implemented. But what I wanted to do, if we're going to be agents of change for youth and families, is to think of something aspirational. Think of things that aren't in place, but if it was an ideal situation, what could bring about a significant change and improve the lives of children and families. So we want to make sure that we add that. There's some handouts, tons of handouts. Didn't know if we were going to have a mix of an audience. There's some for parents, some for educators. It looks like there may be more educators and professionals in the room. Feel free to take them anyway and give them to your parents that you work with in your organization. So, how about I throw out the first question to the panel, and then we'll go from there. So, starting with you, Dr. Watson, what are some of the challenges that you are seeing in schools today that they're having to address with children and families?
Good morning, everybody.
Okay, there we go. So, the biggest challenge I would see is dealing with children that have maladaptive behavior, and we've spent the whole morning talking about trauma and how it affects the body. But when you have children who don't fit the regular pattern of what you expect a child to do in the classroom or in the school, it becomes a problem for the classroom, it becomes a problem for the principal, and it becomes a problem for the school. And so trying to get the school to understand how to utilize their resources or create systems that allow for a child like that to have their deficits addressed in a way that doesn't automatically send them straight to like an alternative learning environment, or they get sent to JDC, but getting the schools to understand that they could possibly provide some type of skills training for that student that may have a deficit in some type of behavior or some type of learning. That is the biggest challenge, but I do feel like we are making changes in that area. With Dr. Sutton being here, with providing awareness about trauma. There's a program that we have going on in the department they call Thrive that is actually getting teams of individuals and teaching them how to manage systems of support for students. So multi-tiered systems of support is what we're trying to expand across the state. And what that does is it provides support for children, whether it be academics or behavior, in a tiered model. So in tier 1, that's where everybody's thriving, everybody's doing what they're supposed to do. But then when a kid starts to exhibit behaviors that are different from tier 1, how does your school manage those behaviors? What systems of supports are in place to help that student at that point? And then if it goes to a point where they're exhibiting tier 3 behaviors, then what do you have available for those kids? So it's not a, this kid did this, they're out of here type approach. It's more of a systematic way of managing those behaviors in a way that keeps that kid around their peers, keeps them in the school so that they're continuing to learn. So it's a challenge, but I feel like we're heading in a direction that's going to manage those situations.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions about, yes, ma'am.
Thrive, is this a program for the students or the teachers?
No, ma'am. It's a program for like schools, or it could be a district. So districts will send a team and they can apply to go through this training. It's a year training where they have to actually show that that there's evidence that they are implementing it, and then those individuals will get a grant for participating as long as they can show that evidence. So there are teams of individuals. It's typically the assistant principal, counselor, it could be one of your lead teachers, maybe a social worker, just depends on the dynamics of the district.
So they go to a year's training?
Yes, ma'am.
And then get certified to Thrive.
Thrive is just, it's the name of the program, but you can say that my team has been through Thrive and we know how to implement tiers of support for students.
Okay, thank you. Awesome. All right, so, from a parent's perspective, what are you seeing as some of the challenges?
From a parent's perspective, I think just the fact that you all have been part of the conversation is where we could begin. Parents, oftentimes, they do feel like they're outsiders. And I don't think that that is something that's intentional. I think the school system just kind of sees it as, okay, well, this is your child, and this is what we have in place, so that we make sure that they are okay here, but they don't understand that it is a community partnership, that it's not just about what is happening in the school, it's what I take home with me at school. I think the biggest misconception also is, when I first started out as my own advocate for my child, and then as I started to advocate for others, I realized that parents just don't have the information. They really lack the knowledge of what to do. And that transcends social, economic status, race, or anything. I have literally had conversations with pediatricians that have had to ask me, what do I do? And I'm like, you diagnose this. But in their head, it's their child. It's a total different background. So I think one of the things, as a parent, just coming from a parent's perspective, if the school system just recognizes that sometimes they are the gatekeeper, you are the point of information. So when I come to you, and if your attitude towards me is, wow, this is a diagnosis, how dreadful for you, that has already spent my mind to, there's no possibility in it. I'm so grateful, though, that my first point of contact was a speech and language pathologist that just clearly said to me, I heard your heart, I understand your concerns, we are all on the same team, we're gonna do what's best for your daughter. And so that is what helped me. But a lot of parents didn't experience that. They unfortunately got that educator that was just like, oh, I don't know what we're gonna be able to do. And so now they feel defeated before there was even a shot of trying, from a parent's perspective.
Thank you. And that's very important. We're gonna come back to that a little bit later. All right, Ms. McCollum, you're up. What are some of the challenges from your perspective as a school counselor, school-based counselor that you're seeing?
Well, from the school counselor's perspective, I've had to reflect on my experience as a classroom teacher. And I always realized with myself as an educator and also observing my colleagues, you can't teach a class if you can't manage the class. So I would observe just the behaviors of different students in the classroom and know that, okay, there's some barriers to the learning, and just being curious as to what's really going on with the child, and making sure the child had the services they needed was hard, being in the classroom. So that's what prompted me to continue my education and work as a school counselor. Even in that setting, I found that it was hard actually providing counseling services to students in the school environment because of other tasks that were asked of the school counselor. So, still these students were being overlooked and their needs were not getting met, and they were continuing to experience different barriers to learning and education. So, what I'm seeing that's missing and that are great barriers is just the teachers, the administrators, and even sometimes school counselors. They're missing that awareness piece of not what's wrong with you, or continuing to ask, what's wrong with this child, but what has happened to this child, and just being able to take a stance of curiosity versus judgment, and get the proper education, the training, the professional development that would help them to become more successful in meeting the students' needs. And sometimes it goes beyond just the academic needs of the students and the parents as well. We have to be better advocates for creating safe learning environments. Not just logistically safe, but emotionally safe learning environments. And I'm an advocate for that. I'm passionate about school culture and coaching educators to help them create safe, emotionally safe learning environments, and becoming aware of what's going on within them. Are they experiencing secondary trauma from the child in the classroom who is reacting and acting out based on trauma? So it's kind of like, just putting a puzzle together, if that answers your question, and just helping the educators become more aware. In an ideal world, we would all be seeing things in these schools from trauma-based means.
Yes, ma'am?
So I've been hearing a lot of you talk about trauma, and I'm wondering if there should be more trauma-informed care and trauma-informed learning within the school district, within the teachers, the administrative team, and the counselors. Do you recommend that in order to assist better with, how can we, rather than wondering, to kind of rephrase your statement of what is wrong, but rather take initiative of how can I help?
Most definitely. Yes, absolutely.
And there's actually initiatives, and Dr. Holmes is sitting right in front of you. She's a part of that team that is going out to train school districts, right, at the administrative level. So that kind of ties into a question that I'll be asking a little bit later. So hold on to that, okay? We'll talk more about that. And you had a question?
I have, look, our school district, they're actually putting social workers into the school district, and that's exactly what I'm in the school doing now. And I'm in Cloverdale Middle School. Do you feel like that would take some of the weight off of some counselors as far as dealing with some of the physical and mental issues where you can focus more? But you can tell it's kind of a hard transition as far as who's doing what and why. But do you feel like that's a great need in the school district, social work?
Yes, definitely, because the school counselor is there for all students.
Right.
And of course, there are different tiers. We can pull small groups and also do individual meetings with students, but we're really not technically, most school counselors are not trained to provide therapy. It's a totally different discipline. So yes, social workers and also community-based mental health therapists are needed in the schools. So we appreciate it.
still, like, the gravity of the situation, and I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here, but the gravity of the situation is that most elementary schools typically only have one counselor, right? So the ratio is 1 to 4 or 500, 1 to
350.
that's still a lot.
That's a lot.
1 to 350 in high schools, that number is even higher.
Especially if the school is hiding those type of issues.
Exactly. So these are, again, that's another challenge. The ratio from professional to students is extremely high, and how do you address some of those issues? But here is another individual that's in the schools, Ms. Hunt, from a psychological examiner perspective. What are you seeing as some of the challenges?
As a psychological examiner in the school district, I perform evaluations for students who are referred for special services. Children who are presenting with academic difficulties, students who are presenting with behavioral challenges. Sometimes those challenges are developmental challenges, so most of them are referred for special education. And as a part of that, there are like 13 different categories, disability categories. And what I see a lot of are the children who are referred are students who are like acting out in class. Sometimes teachers will say, well, they can't do anything. So they're in a classroom, a lot of them are being overstimulated because I think the classes are just too big. There's nothing I individually can do about that, but parents have the power to do that, to talk to the school boards and to the education department, the state education department. One of the things that I see too is we have a disproportionate number of African American males still being referred for special education services. Many of those students that I see in a one-on-one situation, with the exception of a few, those students really have the ability, they're just not performing. They're not engaged in the classroom, they're not hearing information that reflects their culture, their life, their being. And so when I'm in a situation and they have pictures up on the walls, with the diversity. Now with this new Learns Act where you can talk about equality, equity, and those things in the schools anymore, teachers are at a, it's going to be really crazy because students of color will not see anything in the schools that specifically reflect them. Most of the time that a lot of the people that I refer, students that are referred because, quote, they're behind. And what I see is not that they're behind, it's a lack of exposure in a lot of situations. It's a lack of exposure. There's a difference between I don't know this, or I can't know this if I've never seen this, I've never experienced this or anything like it. So that's one of the challenges that I see. And then when students do qualify, you have teachers who, well, he needs to be on some medication, so I'm going to refer him for special ed. First of all, that's illegal to say to a parent, I think your child needs to be on medication, blah, blah, blah. So I have a lot of teachers that refer kids because, well, he would just do well if his mom would put him on some medication. And I've called myself because a few times I asked them, where did you get your medical degree? That is not a diagnosis that we in the schools can make. And oftentimes I have to clarify that. The other part is, challenge that I see is parents who are not really informed or understand the process of what's happening. We go in a conference, we want to do this to help your child, blah, 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 will you sign these papers? Without really going into detail about what that means. We had parent after parent who said, well, I didn't want my child in special ed. And they'll come back with, well, you signed this paper. Well, apparently I didn't understand, and you have lots of parents, and I tell parents in the conference, even if your child qualifies for special ed, you do not have to place them in special ed, you do not have to agree with that. The school is there, the evaluation data is used to determine what are the strengths and needs of the child. Sometimes those needs are better met for that child staying in a regular class, even though they are struggling. Life is not devoid of struggle. Students who make A's and B's are slightly above, they're above, okay? Those are above average students. We forget average students, and when we look at grading systems, that an average student is a C and above student. A C is considered average. But because of the push of the State Department of Education and all of the raises, not just our state, but the laws regarding around education, say that all children will be on, they want all children to read on grade level. Well, that's all well and good, and the vast majority of them will, but there are some who won't. And so we continue to push them, but just having parents informed and aware of what they're signing, and having someone to sit down and explain to them what the testing process, what this evaluation is about, what it's going to tell us. And I try to do that as often as I can with parents, but I'm not always in the conference where those documents are being signed. So to just keep kids in the general education curriculum as much as possible, and there is a push for that at this point for lots of students to keep them in the general education curriculum. They need support within the classroom not to be pulled out, because when they're pulled out of the classroom, they are missing instruction, good instruction. And I'll end on this note, I have to explain to my colleagues in the classroom often, special education is not a substitute for education. It is a supplement to and a support for students who have alternate ways of learning, who need an extra little help. And it is not meant to be a lifetime commitment from kindergarten or second grade all the way through the rest of the school career.
Karen, can I speak?
Absolutely.
I want to touch on 3 points. So we talked about the social workers being in the schools. So you being in the school is only going to be as good as that system is, because you talk about numbers. The way that everything kind of fits together, all right? So somewhere in our minds we think that because those numbers of 100, 1 to 300, like all those kids are going to need services. Really, it should only be about 25%. So if you got a good system in place, then those numbers could be split between that counselor and that social worker, or even a paraprofessional who could just help with some little small conflict resolution skills if they got a good curriculum. So there are ways to manage it, but it's got to be in a good system. So you're only going to be as good as the system is, because it could be a situation where you have 150 and that counselor has 150. So you've got to have a system that identifies kids that truly need it. Same thing with that straight shot to special education. If you don't have a good system that catches that kid when they start doing things in the classroom early, and you start to see this kid's problems are related to the fact that he doesn't have the communication skills to even tell you when something's wrong, then it is going to be a straight shot, because you're not looking at, okay, how can I address that deficit of their inability to communicate with like a tier 2 session with the social worker or with the counselor. That's what we're trying to, well, I know I'm trying to get people to frame it in the system, because like Dr. Sutton said, you can't eat the whole elephant with one bite. It's got to be pieces. So if we look at it as how can we address it as a system, then we won't be trying to develop the whole elephant. The last piece is inclusive practices. So where it used to be, I'm going to get this kid in special education because I'll get him out of my class, that's not going to happen anymore. They're going to still be in your class getting services with supports from a special education teacher through inclusion. Because Arkansas is actually behind as it relates to inclusion. We still have classrooms that are in the back of the schools where our SPED students are housed. I was in one district where they had special education outside the door of the classroom.
Wow.
And that's wrong. So I know that there are changes coming. I know I'm pushing for those changes, and everything that you guys talk about today is very important, but it's all about the system that you're in. And we need to start asking questions. Do you have a system that addresses kids with this type of behavior? What does it look like? Because if they don't have a system, they're not gonna have an answer for you. But if they do, they're gonna be able to talk you through that. And then that family that doesn't know about SPED, in tier 3, they're gonna have a process where they're gonna tell you, hey, in tier 1, this student started exhibiting these behaviors and we started to do this. In tier 2, we started to do this and it didn't work. But there's gonna be steps, and so by the time they get to tier 3, that family should already be informed on where the deficits are and how special education or 504 could resolve those issues. But yes, being a school site and testing students, I always question, why am I getting this kid so fast? Y'all haven't even done any interventions with this kid. So why is it coming straight to me?
That's one of the big other challenges too in schools, is that there is a process called RTI, which is response to interventions. And oftentimes, response to intervention is overlooked. There are 3 tiers, as Dr. Watson said. Tier 1, everybody gets it. That's the general education curriculum, positive behavior supports within the classroom. Tier 2 is when little dummy isn't getting it. He's not falling in with he's not learning or not performing. A lot of times they're not performing. There's a difference too between performing and knowing. Sometimes they know. I tested a little girl this spring, and she had some issues. She told me, I know the answers, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you. And so, what do you do with that? You know, I don't think she may have been as well, so you document that the child refused or what have you. But tier 3, when you get to tier 2, tier 2 is where you're doing some extra things in the classroom where, you know, if Johnny is not understanding the concept of addition, then you're going to do some extra things above and beyond what you're doing for the whole class to help him understand regrouping in that process. But a lot of times, the students are still not performing, and so tier 3 is the next level. And that's where evaluation comes in. When you get to tier 3, they're generally referred for special ed. I was in a workshop yesterday, we had a gentleman talking about this thing, achievement gaps. And he says, you know, we have too many students who still drop out of school. Some in middle school, and some in high school. And he gave us a list of 6 factors that we, as a school district, education system. The first one, you know, everybody talks about college ready, career ready, and college ready, career ready when they leave high school. Well, for many students who have the different challenges, if they're stuck in a special education class all day, every day, they are not going to be career ready. The next step beyond career ready was military. Some students will do that, but you have to have a high school diploma to do that. And if you drop out in middle school or high school, those 2 things are not options for you for the rest of your life, is how he put it. Now, you could go back, but not very many students are motivated to do that. Then we get to the next one was where they can just get these little jobs, you know, working at McDonald's, something, hotels, cleaning, where you're struggling financially all the time. That puts you in a whole different place. And then the last 2, the next one I believe was where you see people getting disenchanted with life, and so some of them are over in the criminal justice system, influenced by drugs, you know, getting involved in drugs, and then the last one was death. So we want our children to be on the first one, if possible, college ready, career ready. But if we have students who are not getting what they need, the foundation of that is in elementary school. It is in elementary. If you don't get it then, if you can't read by the time you get to middle school, you're going to be very disenchanted with education. education for the rest of the time. So those are the challenges that I see also.
And you had something to add?
Yes, to Dr. Watson's point about systems, and the infrastructures in these schools, and I can only speak to the school, for the schools. Okay. Definitely systems should be in place, but as a school counselor, as an educator, but also a mental health professional, I'm looking at how these systems are broken when there are staff and adults who are not consistent with following the systems and being reactive with children. And then the system that is supposed to be in place, like the different tiers, that the students should go through. It's not their fault, it's not the students' fault that they're missed and that they're falling through the gaps. It's the systems are not being followed, right, a lot of the times.
So I will say what you have, or what you're observing is a adult-focused system, where they are more concerned with the opinions of the adults or how it's going to affect my teachers, rather than how it's going to affect my students. And so that is something that will kill the system. How you will focus more on the adults, because the adults are not the problem, the kids are the problem. And if we don't pour into those students, then that affects our scores, that affects everything. So yeah, you have basically a situation where adults are being considered over children. I agree with that.
Right, and a lot of our buildings, a lot of our schools, can be looked at as, organizations that deal with, they're on the front lines, the teachers are on the front lines, the administrators are on the front lines, and they need mental health professionals there to serve the adults.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
it is definitely a systemic concern.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. This is a question to anybody on the panel that'd like to answer. What do you guys think is the fine line between the burden that's put on the teachers? I know they're bringing in more social workers, more interventionalists and that type of thing, but where's the fine line between the burden that's put on the school districts to the children being referred to outside programs, like after-school programs? Like, for instance, we have a behavioral after-school program that deals with the 4 systems of respect, critical thinking, anger management, conflict resolution. And I feel like if you deal with those 4 systems, then you can, if you're successful at it, then you can create an individual that's ready to learn. So again, the question is, where do you guys think that fine line is? What the public and private schools can do and the burden that's on the teachers and the administrators and the counselors, opposed to the children being referred out?
Okay, I'll speak on it first. So within the district, especially before I go in, one of my first questions is what resources are in the community?
Yeah.
Because it is a community effort.
Yes.
We're trying to build a whole child, and
Yes.
we need everybody involved. So that would be part of the resources that would be in a tier 1, tier 2 situation. So first thing, hey, we have these resources out here for your kids if you feel like they could benefit from it. But then in tier 2, hey, parent, I know there's a community organization out there that focuses on these particular skills. We feel like your child will benefit from that. So once again, there's a lot of stuff out there, but where does it end up being put to where we can see what's available so that we can actually utilize it for what it's for? Because what could happen is you get all the kids that are having problems in schools, and then your system can't manage them all, your program can't manage them all. So it's more of how you prescribe what that particular student needs.
Yeah.
For the teachers and the administrators, there should be MTSS, which is multi-tier system support, there should be supports for them available as well. They should have a channel to be able to say, hey, I'm overwhelmed. Where do I go and get these free services that I know this district provides for me? Is it safe for me to even do that? Will I be penalized if I do take those days? Is it gonna hurt me? Like, there shouldn't be any barriers to our staff getting those supports. But if, once again, we got a good system, it will address it. Yes, sir.
What are those systems that provide services for the faculty and teachers?
So they're free. I think they're up to 6 or 8 different, and you may be able to answer this as you work in schools as a counselor. You get free sessions as a school staff. 6 to 8 free sessions that all they have to do is go to the central office, let them know they're about to do it, and then they'll be reimbursed for it. Or I think the district just pays for it.
Is this like the EAP system?
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And our school district actually has a whole department dedicated to it now.
I don't think these teachers know about this.
It was announced at convocation, the person that's actually over that department actually got up and introduced herself and said, if you are having struggles because the children cannot be well, if you aren't well, contact our office and we'll take you to the
Is
department.
this something new that they can
Yes,
use?
this is a great initiative.
COVID, I saw so many teachers.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Oh, yeah.
But this service was not in place then.
No, ma'am. Dr. Wright, this is, he just started this year, last year.
Right.
And after his reflection, he said, moving forward, this is what we're
So
going to
this
do.
has been introduced by Dr. Ryan.
Yes,
All right.
and it was announced at convocation, and so teachers, any employee in the district, there's an entire department dedicated to any employee, whether you're district level or school based.
This is good to know. And how do they access it again?
There's an office. They can call the main office. There are people placed within each network. The district is now divided by each network. They can call the network, general office, you can start with 447
Why do you
1000.
find out what the network is? It seems like there are tiers that they go through.
Yes, you can start with just 447 1000. They have a customer service department and they will direct you.
Why they call
It's
447
just 447 1000.
And that's for the Little Rock.
Yeah,
That's the right school district, yes.
But every district has.
As an EAP, yeah.
So
This is just been recently.
Yeah. Every
No.
district has EAP and even
Yeah, it is being going on, it just hasn't been utilized like that. And
I
I
don't
think,
think they know about it.
yes, the problem is like when the school year starts, hey, it's all about what you gotta do that day, and that's it. I'll catch you at the end of the year, we'll talk about it. But it's not continued to be pushed. I think that's the problem. Like at the end of the quarter, hey, remember this is available. Next quarter, remember this is available, but yes, I get what you're saying.
And Dr. Suffman talked about a program too, today, where they'll come, yes, AR Connect. Connect, okay, so
Right.
they'll come into this, all they need is a phone call. And I was,
That's trees, I think she's talking about trees.
Yeah, that's for students. So in situations where you don't know how to get to mental health, and you just need somewhere to start, you contact that number for your child.
the AR Connect.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, but I thought the 5 to 6 sessions were for kids.
No, the EAP program will provide teachers with 6.
She mentioned that today, she
It may-
mentioned it's a program today.
may-
I thought it was a teacher training program.
I thought so.
She did,
But
she
now-
also mentioned that there's a mental health component open to any and everybody.
Well, that was Arkansas.
Yes.
Or that was not exclusive.
That was not exclusive to the
But
kids.
this is
Okay.
exclusive for teachers.
Yeah,
It's a
EAP.
school program.
And is the EAP program like even for the teachers and their kids, or is it just for the teachers?
It's for the teachers.
Just the teachers have it?
But that's
For the
good to know.
employees.
Yeah, I did not know.
See, EAP, I thought has been open to the employee's family.
It is open to the employees' families as well, and Dr. Griffin, it sounds like, and just talking to Ms. Giles, it's the same EAP, that we've been seeing teachers in, our practices and so forth. There's a new department now that is just promoting it more.
Yes.
And also, because it's still going to go through, they're going to go through their EAP to get to us, basically, but it's a department that's promoting more, like a wellness,
Like they
On-site.
provide on-site
On-site.
services
Continue to
as a
encourage.
part of their benefits.
Yeah. And in charter schools, well, I can't speak for all charter schools, but the one in which I serve is, I'm the person on staff, that they can utilize for their sessions. They get unlimited sessions actually.
This is very important to know.
It is, but they need to utilize it.
Yep.
Exactly, but I think if they know it, about it, they can probably.
And I think some people are reluctant to use those programs because of, you know, I'm not sure how it works, but I've heard a lot of people say that they are reluctant to use those services because of the, I guess, stigma attached to this. And that's why a lot of them choose to go to outside people.
I think it's the privacy aspect, you know, your employer is offering this service, and so you somehow think that your boss or administrator are gonna find out what you're revealing. I think that's part of it, you know. There isn't, they follow the same confidentiality rules, just so that's not the case, but our community just has stigmas about mental health, period, and so they're not trusted of anybody regardless of the service, you know.
Yeah, and one of the things is, back to that one bite at a time, because I've had the privilege and the honor of having been a classroom teacher, but now on the parent side and then now on the clinician side. One bite at a time, when I started at Little Rock School District last year, I started to go to the novice teacher trainings and train them. And one of the first things that I would say is, we gotta get it out of our head that if we couldn't fix it, that somehow that diminished our character, our ability to teach. And so we're starting to have more and more conversations about, you have to be honest, you have to say when you need to tap out. You know, you are human, we have to get back to the humanity of this, and we have to look at each other as humans and that human aspect. So one bite at a time, we are sending the message to educators, you have to ask for help. Because the more you do this, and I always tell that story about when I was a first year, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed novice teacher, but a chair got thrown in my head. In that moment, it was like, okay, what's going on? But I took a moment and thought the humanity of this kid, because he didn't know it was the first day of school. He's mad about something. How can I get him to the side, love on him, show him we all make mistakes. It's the same as we are human and adults. How we want second chances, the babies want second chances as well. So we're having these conversations with teachers so they don't feel overwhelmed, and you know, you want to feel like you have the tools you need to do your job successfully. And so we are, one bite at a time, have these conversations with educators to let them know that it's okay to feel like you don't know what the heck you're doing some days. I don't have a magic wand either, because if I did, I would be rich.
So, she had a question real quick, and then we'll come to you, and then in the interest of time, Rob, push us along.
I moved on a little bit after Ms. Giles responded, but I did want to say, as an educator, I know what it's like to not the EAP. One of my issues was the access of like, where do I go, where's the number, where's all that? So all that information wasn't available to me as an educator. Also, the timing of the counseling sessions. So what does that mean? That means I gotta be, as an educator, you need to take half a day or a full day to get up from out the classroom, right? And so being okay with that. And when we talk about systems, that means a consistent practice of doing this every day. So what's the climate? Are we consistently creating a climate where teachers feel okay to leave the classroom for half a day or a day to say, I gotta take care of myself, right? So that to me is part of the system. Are we setting consistent practices within our school district and our building, and what does that language look like? And are we consistently using safe language where teachers can feel like, oh, okay, let me practice this humanity. So that's why I'm like, are we discussing that piece as far as like, what does that system look like within the district and the buildings? Because systems are basically consistent practices done over and over again. Am I correct? All right, that's all I'm saying.
Thank you.
So I just want to relate to what Katina said. Thank you for that comment. And we talk a lot about systems. And so I've worked with a lot of administrators. So I'm just wondering, for you all that's in the school system, like what are some ways to get that administrative buy-in? right? Because I've worked with administrators and some of them, they're self-selected, some are just as passionate as everybody here. But then sometimes it's very difficult to get them to hear the importance of it, the why, because just like you said, like it's going to take the quality system in order to make a lot of these things that we're talking about a reality. So I don't know if you all have tips about that, how to engage the administrators to get them on board.
And let me piggyback on that. That was actually my question I was going to throw out to you, and I have not forgot that. But if we can also talk about how do we get these administrators, the educators, and other professionals to just look at the mental health in our children differently. What are some tips or strategies? And I know this is like, can you fix everything, right? I'm throwing this at you, but we can plant seeds. And I'm really good at that. I like to pride myself on planting the seed, and I'll let somebody else water it if need be. But how do we get these individuals in these positions to see us differently, to see our children differently, and to see mental health differently?
And on that note, I think there needs to be more mental health awareness training for administrators and also for the employees to realize that this is a part of self-care, just like physical medical care. Awareness is very important. The professional development events and things of that sort. So these educators need to be in conversation with you all about the importance of this procedures and other staff members.
So let's start with Ms. McComb. Let's fix it.
One bite at a time. In approaching the administrators, I believe that we as clinicians need to be able to speak their language. If you don't have a background, consult with someone, what is their language? Their language, because they're trained in administration, and in education, unless they do a license, is their building, the turnover of teachers, the number of sick calls from teachers, the number of referrals, the number of parents that are calling the Department of Education, right? So we have to, use maybe what we know about psychology to appeal to what their need is and approach it from that aspect. Okay, so what is the answer to this? Why do you have to have a whole new staff every year? Well, what's going on here? What's going on with your teachers? Okay, so we have some answers here. Let's approach it from a mental health standpoint. And that's all I know to do. That's what I'm doing in my building as a consultant.
This might be a good segue into maybe your comment or question.
I absolutely have forgotten.
Oh, and
All this
That's
information.
absolutely okay, because I'm getting all this great information, so it's kind of like filtering in and out, but I do want to say this one little bit. I'm in the school district and I've heard all these things, but when you actually in the school and you're talking about all these programs and things like that, I work with kids who cannot go after school to these programs. They don't have a mom and a dad at home. They're going home alone. They don't have the resources to get to these programs that they're needing. And that's where we're seeing a lot of problems. So we're pouring in all these good things to them during the day, and then they're going home to the same situation every night. And then they're coming back and they're hearing all these positive things, and then they're going back home to negative every night.
Right.
So that's what we're seeing most of the problems in the school district, with the children and the student and the teachers.
and this gentleman back here.
Okay, hello everyone, my name is Shem, and I'm with the Center for Healing Hearts and Spirits. And what I do is provide opioid education to our community, and I'm always excited to talk about substance misuse and prescription misuse as well with the younger generation. So knowing that most of the youth are using substances to escape from the environment, the social environment, the physical environment, due to all types of traumas, physical or mental. I was just trying to find out, especially with administrators, what type of, now that we're talking about sowing seeds, what type of systems are in place or what type of talks are going on in this spaces to specifically address issues regarding opioids, because we've seen an alarming rate, specifically intentional and some not intentional, in the ages of 9 to all the way up to 18. And I was just trying to find out what types of talks are happening or if this talks are going on right now. Thank you.
So to answer that one, and then also to answer yours, data, principals, their language is data. And so if your achievement scores are at the bottom, your referrals are up here, your teachers are leaving out of the building, they want a way to fix it. And so, just like Mr. Cole said, it is knowing their language and then being able to say, hey, here's a way we can possibly solve it. But to answer yours, that again, if we know we have a high population of substance abuse, because vaping right now is a major problem. We have kids dying every day from fentanyl use. There's avenues for it. It's just, what does my school say? What does their data say about situations like that? But data is a way to get in. But then being able to say that if you do this, it'll work on this. If you do this, it'll work on this part. Because you can't solve it all, but one piece at a time may affect all those other situations or other pieces of data.
Dr. Holmes, did you have a question?
And it may be related to what you were about to say. I was just gonna piggyback off of what you were saying about when the kids go home, like you pour all into them and they go home and then what do we do there? I feel like it's connected with what Ms. Giles was saying and what others have said about community and family partnerships.
Right.
So that was my other question is how do we engage, I know this is a big question, but how do you really engage parents and families, right? Because I'm working, consult with like pre-K Head Start settings, and they try to provide so much with this parenting stuff and join us and parent engagement and all these events. They provide food and childcare, all the things that they try to do, and they still don't get that type of engagement. So, and I'm sure you kind of struggle with the same thing. So, any thoughts about like how to engage parents and families more effectively?
So I would say, first you have to ask them, what does engagement look like to you? Because for some parents, I got them to school on time, I am engaged. I'm just being serious. I work 2 or 3 jobs to keep food on the table, to keep the lights on, they get to school on time, they're dressed nice, they're fed. I am engaged. So the first thing is, what does engagement look like to you? And I can say this because I was actually just on the committee. It was one of the superintendent's constraints, one of the things he wanted us to focus on, and they asked me to be the parent person. And I said, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm the cheerleader of let's do this and let's do this and do this, but then we ask them if that's what they want. So data, because that was going to be my answer about administrators. I'm all about data and just asking the questions. How do we keep you engaged? What does engagement look like for you? What can we do to support you and meet you where you are? Because right now, if I'm sitting in my parent hat, if I enter the school, sometimes I feel like you just don't really even want me there. You know what I mean? You would rather me just drop my kid off and then come and sign papers. Just like the point was earlier. So just ask about what does engagement look like to me, and then how I like to participate when I'm working a job. A text message is just fine for me, but it doesn't mean that I love my child less. Sometimes it's just I don't want to admit that I don't know, that I have lack of knowledge. I say that a lot in my book. Another great book is Ruby Payne's Framework of Property. I'm sure a lot of you have read that before. But just talking about just culturally what that really means to be engaged and to feel like you're being put on the spot or feel like, you know what, I don't want it to seem like I don't love my child or I don't care. So I'd rather just, you do what you do, I do what I do over here. So and just asking just questions and starting there, building the relationship and rapport. One of the things that I said to the novice teachers last year, start calling now with the positives. Start it now, do it every day. Class dojo, we had a fantastic day because when you start that, he did his tongue at me. She hit her chair. And you're calling parents and they're trying to work. you have lost them. It's about building that rapport, building that relationship. When you do that, you can get a parent to do anything for you. Because I guarantee you, that day that kiddo threw that chair in my head, when I called that parent and I just said, we made it to the class, it was all good, this happened, and I'm gonna just keep you informed. No, I need to tell the principal, because something's going on, and I wanna be here with you to see how I can support, because he is here to learn. And I'm not gonna be kicking him out of my class every day, because I have a job to do to teach him and educate him. What can I do for you? What can I do to partner? It's easy rapport building, and I can say that as a former classroom teacher, because I know the first thing that people want to say, now come on, Ms. Giles, we have 20 kids, or if I work at a secondary school, I have 120 kids. We don't have time for all that. You do have time to just start that relationship. Hey, we had a great day. And when the day comes that you have to say, you know what? And she had an attitude today, I don't know what's going on. Oh, that parent is gonna be like, you did what? Because I already know what you're doing to that lady in the classroom. So when she called me and said you did this, I'm on your behind. Build relationships. That's the start.
I love what you said, Ms. Jones, because I remember many, many years ago, where did we work together? In the nursery. Yes, and we, experienced some things with the baby. Yes. Building relationships.
And the parent-school connection is so, so important.
That's the community.
Because, a lot of parents come to school, we have to stop and think, what was that parent's experience in school? A lot of times they did not have very good experiences, so you call them every day or every other day to tell them their child is doing this, and none of it's positive. I wouldn't want to come up there either. I wouldn't want to talk to you either. Because all I'm getting is negative. Now, next thing you tell them, you want to go to special needs, or you want to be in an alternative learning setting or something. But that part is so important. So when, like I'm getting ready to evaluate a student, I call the parent, introduce myself, tell them, what I'm doing, and explain to them the whole process. Because a lot of them don't have time to just run up to the school. But that school-parent connection is so, so important. And I think that's a big push that sometimes schools miss an opportunity to make a connection. They'll send out this big thing. Everybody have a big bash. Oh yeah, a lot of parents came out for food and fun and all this, but then when it comes time for parent-teacher conference, they gotta show up. Pretty everybody. Well, there are some parents you know are gonna show up, but you have a lot that don't, and then we start ascribing meanings to why they didn't come, and we really don't know.
And so I think this panel has done a wonderful job at providing some concrete kind of strategies that you can use to kind of build, I think, the underlying aspect that brings true to me is relationship building. It's amazing. And did you, I'm trying to think, I read an article where it was talking about the efficacy of therapy. And they say the number one contributing factor that leads to success in therapy is the relationship that the therapist has with the client. So I'm a numbers person, so I believe in relationship building. And it sounds like that is maybe a good place to start, is building relationships and having these conversations. Just to piggyback on something, and then in the interest of time, if we can go one by one with just another kind of tip that we can give folks, that would be great. As an MST therapist, I found out some people were saying that we invite them to these events and parents don't show up, or we don't get the turnout that we're looking for. And I remember MST is done in the home. So we eliminate the barrier of transportation or them coming to us, because if we do it in the schools, sometimes we're seen as still part of the system. So I remember doing therapy in the home, and I'm part of the juvenile justice system. I didn't get buy-in right away, but my supervisor told me to find a way. He didn't believe in resistance. He didn't believe in parents not being engaged. The onus of engaging that person was on me, and I had to find a way. Well, I saw this little ugly fish that was mounted to like a bass. It was a bass, a trout, and maybe something else on the wall. Well, I came with my little hat for Bass Pro Shop, and I did not shop at Bass Pro. But my dad was a game warden, and we went fishing. So we started having conversations about that. That's how I got the family to align. So we have to find a way to align with kids, parents, educators, all of us together. I just wanted to add that. But if we can go, we'll start from this end. I'm tired, you're probably tired of me putting you on the spot first.
Thank you.
Ms. Hunt, if you can provide one more concrete step on how we can begin to push forward and spark change, that would be great.
Communication. We have to communicate not only with our colleagues, but we have to communicate. Most of the time things are sent from the top down, but they're expected to work from the bottom up. And we just have to have that communication that we all speak in the same language to educate our children and to help our parents be a part of that. Every parent desires for their child to learn to be successful in school. And oftentimes at schools and within systems, parents feel locked out. So my tip would be for us to have very clear, open dialogue with parents and within the school.
All right.
We have to be intentional about creating environments and the culture in our buildings, in our school, community school buildings where students, families, and staff feel safe, have a sense of belonging, and can connect. Because if that doesn't happen, no one will be doing anything for anyone. You can't ask a student to do something or have expectations from a student that you have not built a safe relationship with. Administrators cannot have high expectations for staff if they have not been intentional about building relationships with staff.
Recognize that sometimes you are it, and instead of waiting, oh,
I got you, turn it on.
thank you. Recognizing that sometimes you are the one that's been called, and rather waiting on someone to tell you or standing on the sideline saying, well, I wish we could have had this in place, go get it done.
So I'm gonna focus on like the family, because we didn't talk about poverty much, but poverty affects Arkansas. We're like number 4 or 5 in the nation as it relates to poverty. And families from poverty don't have books in the home. Speak pure words. So I would like to recommend that we get books in our homes. We can do it on phones now. While they're playing the game, they can be doing something academically, learning some sight words. And also we want to increase our language to where it is not just functional language, where we're talking about what we're going to eat, or are we going to stay over at auntie's house, but inquisitive language, where they're asking questions and getting feedback. Reciprocal language, where they are learning to dialogue, because those are the skills that are going to help them when they get into schools, because that's what it's all about, reading and being able to reciprocate language. Last one, look up 21st century skills. Those are the skills that are going to be needed in the next century workforce. And if you look at those skills, they say nothing about being able to do geometry. They don't say anything about being able to do social science. It is more about being able to collaborate, being able to adapt, being able to problem solve. Those are just simple skills that will make our kids successful in the future. So 21st century skills is one of those.
Awesome, awesome. Thank y'all so much. I want to say thank you one more time to Ms. Hunt, Ms. McCollum, Ms. Giles, and my fiance.
It's Giles.
Giles. I heard you say that, like she said it wrong. So Dr. Watson, thank you again so much. And all right. So I think the next thing we're going into is breakout groups and wrap
So
up.
just briefly, I know we're getting at our time here, so we've already talked about next steps, so thank you, Dr. Moore, for introducing next steps, and you all get a good wrap up. So probably what we could do briefly, unless Erica, Dr. Griffin, Mr. Crawford, any other kind of ideas, I'm thinking if we could just say briefly, like what our kind of personal commitment might be. Like what did we take from it, and what's our action steps? So when I was taking notes, I have notes like action. Look into this, like I really need to look and understand more about the Learn Act and everything. I really need to understand that working with schools. So it's some things I'm gonna do, 21st century skills. So I don't know if people just have any comments or talks among yourself about what you're going to do, your commitment, Erica.
I actually mentioned this to Dr. John before she left, but I do evaluations in the school as well, and one of the things that I said I was going to be more intentional about before referral conferences was making sure that I took the time to try to make sure parents were more engaged and felt that they were being heard in those conferences. A lot of times, we have a lot of conferences and we're just trying to get them done and get them in and out, and I've been in conferences where we've gone through all this stuff and parents don't have a clue, and we say, here, sign this, and and kind of brush through, but I was gonna be more intentional about listening to them, to seeing where we could meet them, because I did see last year, there was not a lot of parent engagement, and by the end of the year, it was like just trying to pull teeth to get, kids tested or have conferences to go over results and that sort of thing, and running parents down to the carpool line and get them to sign, we were just wasting too much effort, so I felt I'm not gonna do that this year. We've got to do something different. And so I'm gonna do my part to make sure that I'm communicating with parents and letting them know that I'm here to help your child. What can I do to help you?
Agency-wise or community-wise organization, I'm looking at what we can do as an organization to get that community gap filled. Like this young lady here was saying, addressing the fact that what happens to a child when he or she goes home and they don't have a parent at home, and they don't have supports at home. How can we, as an organization, maybe come up with some ways we can get them engaged, to get communities engaged, and have a more positive environment for children who come home and there's nothing there for them except them. Y'all understand what I'm saying? And because they don't feel engaged, and they're really not energized to go back. And I had this thought on you long after this. I'm feeling old. I went to elementary school when there was no special education. Anybody else in here do that? And I was thinking about the older.
We had different groups within the class.
Yeah, but that's the whole point. We did not have special education. That inclusion, we had that back in the day. We had different groups in the classroom. But one teacher had an ability to reach those students, and those students went outside the classroom to be taught. And I think, I'm telling you, what happened to that?
Everybody was mainstream.
Huh?
Everybody was mainstream.
Yeah. What happened to that? What happened, and I think we need to get back to that kind of environment. And because I think all students can learn from these students, regardless of the level they are, A, B, C, D. I think we're depriving students of learning some things about individuals and humanity by separating students and putting them in different groups. That's my comment. That's it.
And on that note, that created an environment of inclusivity. We just had our all-class reunion. And as Carrie said, everybody was in the same classroom. We had different groups, A, ABC. And we had a student, and I've known him all of my life, and I just realized that this individual is probably on the spectrum. I had this epiphany this weekend, because he was included in everything. The other guys in the class would always include him, he never would initiate, he doesn't get out, he's functional. And I had never had that awareness before because of the environment where we grew up. No one was labeled, it was inclusive, which allowed him to function within the community, within the classroom. It was just a different world.
Anyone else?
So for me, I am like by trade an IO psychologist, so I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. I look at the organization as a whole, the effectiveness and what they're doing, like district-wide. So for me, it's a twofold thing. I love the title change agent because I'm able to say, okay, how can I show up as a mom to incoming ninth grader? Am I truly showing up as engaged, per se, to my child, just by checking his chronos or his workbook? So what can I do to ensure that I'm actually being present in the moment, and also working with those educators at the school in the PTA saying, you know, we need to do more from an organizational level. How can we contribute to the student success? So all of this was really helpful for me. I love the change agent title. I don't know that because that's what I do. But yeah, this is really good. Thank you.
Okay. I got a comment. I think Carrie's my brother, and he told me a lot about what you guys do. But I think the next time you have something like this, I would like to know in advance where I can invite other people like me to be here to hear you guys, and get that one-on-one time, because this has most definitely been an eye-opener for me. Because I know a lot of the things I experienced, a lot of things, but hearing it from professionals, it kind of is a confirmation about all the things training professionals are telling you and trying to help you through these. So I think if the next time I have one of these, where I maybe can invite some of my school teachers and some of the social workers that are working in the school district, that can be here to hear something like this.
Absolutely.
That's just my input.
That'd be awesome.
Okay, just to add to that, I was thinking, that would be great if we could facilitate something maybe later in the fall. If we could not necessarily have, we could have a panel, maybe not a keynote, but if we could just get together and collaborate with one another, for a couple of hours and see what we could do. And I think it's that one bite at a time, so we can take that to some more, and then we can do this maybe quarterly and bring some more people, and then expand the system. I think we can do that. So we're open to that.
So maybe this is just the beginning of a conversation.
Yeah.